Hello and welcome to everybody who's joined us so far. I'm Gabe Abner from Apono. We're going to give it a few moments and then we're going to let the folks start to trickle in, and then we'll start our session. Uh, Appreciate everybody who took the time to sign up, and hope that we can put together an interesting conversation for everybody. I'm just going to give it another minute or two to let a few more folks in. All right, give it a minute or so. Start our intros. Appreciate everybody on the West Coast who's gotten up early for our session today. Appreciate everybody, but definitely folks for starting their mornings with us. Just as a refresher, today's session is going to cover the story of how Labelbox used PagerDuty and Apono to create a new solution for resolving break glass situations faster and more securely. So please make sure to send us any questions you might have as part of the session, and we'll make sure to include those on our list. Give it another moment or two. Okay, let's start to kick it off a little bit. Thanks again for everybody who's joined us. I'm Gabe Abner. I'm from Apono, and today we're joined by Aaron from Labelbox, Sharon from Apono, and Mandy from PagerDuty. And as the invite described, we will be discussing how to improve MTTR and hearing Aaron's story about how he managed to use Apono and PagerDuty to actually make his break glass response mechanism smarter, more secure, and of course faster. So I'll kick it off with Sharon. Please introduce yourself. You're still on mute. Still on mute.
Thank you. Yeah. So thanks, Gabe. Yeah, as you said, I'm Sharon. I'm the director of product at Apono. And today we want to talk about incident response and how to tackle that issue. And, there's obviously inevitably going to be downtime in every company for every product, right? And we want to make sure when that happens, that incident response is lightning fast so that we don't violate our SLAs, so that we don't have any downtime for our users or our customers. And when you do that, you kind of have that conflict, right, between leaving open-ended access, which would get incident response to happen the fastest, but is not a best practice and actually can cause even more harm to your production. And the kind of the flip side of that is, having it so restricted that incident response can't happen fast enough. So this is kind of what we're talking about today. How can shift members respond and gain access, with the least amount of friction, and how can they bring in colleagues to help them when they need to, even if it's not inside working hours. So Apono actually allows us to do that with a smart policy engine. I think we'll be talking about that today. And we handle access in real time, middle of the night, weekends, whatever it is, nobody has to be woken up. And that's actually based on the user environment attributes and contexts. So just a brief intro to Apono.
Okay, great. Mandy?
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here to talk with this folks. PagerDuty, obviously we started out as incident response sort of platform to help you get your responders to where they need to be when you have an incident on your platforms, and managing the security and access to all the components that you have in your infrastructure is super important. We've seen a lot of customers sort of struggle with this over the years, and it's really great to see a product like Apono that can help streamline all of these processes and give folks the access they need to complex structures, whatever instance pop up. So happy to be here and hear the story.
Great. And it's always easy, kind of for us at Apono and PagerDuty to tell you folks, all day long why we're useful, why how we can help you. But I think the best stories always come from customers, and Labelbox is a joint customer of both Apono and PagerDuty. So happy to introduce Aaron. Take it away.
Cool. Hey, I'm Aaron Bacchi, working at Labelbox. So Labelbox offers SaaS platform for training AI models. And so the data and databases are super important for that. So what I've been working on, I'm on the security team, one of two individuals on the security team, and really focusing a lot on cloud configuration, the software security, and many other things.
Excellent. So what's been really kind of interesting for me the past while is kind of watching how identity and access have really kind of become core functions of the cloud security portfolio, which is still a relatively new thing. But I'm wondering, what kind of challenges were you having in managing kind of the break glass situation? Like, what led you to actually start to say, okay, something's wrong here. Let me be an engineer about this.
Yeah, so the thing that kind of initially got my wheels turning and thinking about this was initially our incident response, specifically for Cloud SQL databases, was around letting all the developers have access to static service accounts where they can get in and share those credentials and look at and edit databases. And that wasn't really the most secure method. So that kind of kicked everything off.
Right. So I mean, but there's always this question of how much is something a security issue and how much is this like a productivity, like have to get work done because otherwise you don't have a company to secure. Talk to me a little bit about that tension. Like, what was going on within the company about like, okay, we see from the security angle that something's not the way it should be. We have best practices, we're professionals, but there's also the business to worry about. Like, what were the issues that were kind of holding back a better solution there?
Yeah, so some of the issues around that were identifying that kind of bigger security issue of the shared service accounts, so that we had to find a different solution other than that. And so using Apono, we were able to work on provisioning our developers access for these databases. And then we kind of found that if we were to do that in a really strict and or less strict manner, allowing all developers access to these things, then there'd be too much provisioning still there, but a little bit better than before. So then we kind of finally arrived at our end goal, which was having the right developer have the right access with the correct approval as well from an incident responder itself.
Right. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about like how it was received, or how the actual people, the humans on the team were feeling about it?
Yeah. So at first when we implemented and we were using Apono for allowing just the database admins to get access to these systems, that was a really small group of individuals within the engineering organization. And we had one incident where the person that really needed to get on and actually needed a fix, they were on the call, they were on the incident, and they couldn't request that specific access, unfortunately. So thankfully I was there and I was able to give them that access directly. However, that was kind of the tipping point for figuring out a really true break glass solution.
Right. So Mandy, throwing this one over to you. I mean, what do you hear kind of about the human problems that the PagerDuty customers are coming to you with and saying, you know, here's what we're dealing with when it comes to responding to incidents?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same issues that we've been talking about. A lot of things, as folks moved into sort of microservices architectures, there's a lot more questions about who owns what, how does it get sort of divided up, and dealing with all of the access requirements, especially if you're using like a multi-cloud solution and figuring out how things get put together there. Folks aren't comfortable, obviously, with always open sort of access. And then a lot of our customers also have requirements for more stringent compliance reporting across who has access to things. So having a kind of auditable trail of who's access production during an incident is important to them. So having those kinds of that kind of flexibility and those kinds of capabilities is key to their success with, you know, getting things resolved in production.
Right, right. Okay, and Sharon, I mean, what are you hearing as well about like, you know, the way that people are thinking about which resources they really need to kind of break down into what's always available, what can be requested, and like what actually falls in this kind of bucket of break glass access?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think what we've been hearing from most of our customers is that it's all a question of, you know, how sensitive is this resource and how high risk is this access. So if you have stuff like, let's say, customer data, that's maybe the most sensitive resource that you can have. It's the stuff that you don't want to have overly exposed. And even what's considered, you know, a low level of access, something that some people would consider unprivileged, even something like a view access is still risky when it comes to customer data. And this is where we want to make sure that we have the right level of friction and the right level of access management to stop people from accessing those resources if it's not needed. When it comes to incident response, those things actually clash because you want to have incident response as soon as you can. And obviously, you know, as Mandy said, with organizations becoming more flexible, instances go up and go down. There's lots of databases, lots of teams, projects that are changing. It's really hard to anticipate who'll need the access, who will actually be the right person to handle an incident. And it's an incident, it's a surprise. You don't really know what's going to happen. So you want to make sure that you have the right policies in place that allow people to gain access quickly, and then, you know, as Aaron mentioned, to pull people in, even if they are unexpected, even if we didn't prepare for that scenario. And I think that's what is really nice about Aaron's story, is how he combined those two, like having the right people on shift access the resources, and then for them to be able to pull people in without harming the organization, without causing overexposure. And that's a really common obstacle.
Right. So what I find to be really interesting about that kind of component of the story is, you know, it's less that there's privileged identities, there's more of this privileged access. And kind of what I think we see in the break glass situation is that, you know, the developer on duty changes. The person who they need to bring in to help resolve the problem changes based on the problem. So I think, you know, we're kind of moving past where we had been of, you know, here's privileged identities and, you know, here's a certain admins and we know who they are, to a much more fluid kind of situation where it's about what's that access and how do we make sure that the right people get that access, just like Aaron was saying before. So really interesting insights from everybody. Let's kind of move on to Aaron's story, just because, I mean, it was the MacGyvering kind of like, here's a problem, like I'm going to be a classic engineer and see what I have to work with and pull something together. So tell us a little bit about this specific story, kind of where you started, and kind of how everything kind of developed, and we'll kind of approach it from both, you know, business aspects and technical aspects. But take us away, Aaron.
Yeah. So kind of like I mentioned, when I first came upon this general problem, the engineers were using the shared service accounts. There really wasn't a good thing at all. So like I said, we found a better solution with Apono at first, granting individual engineers or engineers within a Google group that access to production databases. So, they traditionally in that database admin group would be able to get read, write, or admin on these databases. But then when we found, the hole in the armor was, like I also mentioned, the other engineers who were not in database admins sometimes were actually the really key players within responding to incidents. They knew these databases like the back of their hands. So at the same time, as a security professional, I wasn't really keen on giving all of our engineers the ability to even request admin access to production databases 24/7. So trying to balance and weigh those opportunities, right, was really key. So the MacGyver solution that I found, right, based on some trial and error was around letting the engineers who are not in database admins request access to a Google group. So on this slide here, this is a really great flow. So the first flow on the left here, the break glass Google group. This is where PagerDuty comes into play. So if there's some sort of incident with the databases, right, that key engineer who's not on call can go ahead and request the access to the Google group for break glass Cloud SQL, and the PagerDuty on call database admin individual be the approver and able to approve that request. So that just gives them access to a Google group, and that sort of does nothing. There's no one normally in the Google group, but it's a very special one because once you're in that Google group, and only for this period of time when they're approved, it's like 2 hours or so, then that individual, the key individual, can actually use Apono to request admin or write on our production database to be able to address the issue, right? And so that similar individual on the PagerDuty on-call rotations able to approve that, or engineering managers. And so that is kind of that way for that break glass, kind of really small window of time and small surface area for our key engineers to be able to request the access that they need to respond to these incidents, especially if they're not in the database admin group.
Right. So talk to me for a second about how you saw PagerDuty kind of coming in and being your kind of IR, core infrastructure. Like you had it all had to be based on something. Like something has to trigger something, right? Something has to like be the backbone that's managing that. Like, how did you figure kind of like this is what's going to start with me on point A, and then it's going to trigger B, C, all the rest of the flow?
Yeah. So thankfully, we already had an extensive web of use for PagerDuty for general infrastructure, for databases, for app response, et cetera, et cetera. So we do extensively use PagerDuty for general incident response. So the first flow that I had was this flow number 2, actually. And I was able to tinker and dabble with Apono, and I found that there is this integration with PagerDuty and Apono. So it kind of made sense to bring in that database admin on call integration, right? Because you can select the PagerDuty rotation as a principal within the Apono flows. So I was just tinkering on that, and thankfully, because we already had the backbone with PagerDuty for other incident response in general, we're able to leverage that with these 2 tools together.
Right. So it sounds like you're taking something that people are already familiar with as part of like the IR response, and then throwing in Apono on top of it to give them that flexibility to kind of reduce that need to kind of call in the DevOps or DevSecOps person to come and like deal with the other keep bringing on those extra people who need to help resolve the issue. Talk to me a little bit about like how did people respond like once you started implementing this?
Yeah, so we have like bi-weekly tech talks internally for engineering. So once I put this together, I brought it to all of our engineers, at the company and demoed this out, kind of showed it off. It got really good response in that meeting even, right? I created a Confluence page to kind of document the steps as well, for folks that, you know, wanted to read or wanted to brush up on it later. And it's been, thankfully it hasn't been used too many times. We haven't had that many incidents since then. However, it's been used and it's been successful in its use. The right engineer, right, that key engineer that's not in database admin, who can always request admin, right? They're not normally able to, but now with this, they are, and it's been successful. And you know, the last piece to talk on the people side. So before this was implemented, maybe like I mentioned, right, we had one incident where there was a lot of friction and I had to come in and manually do some things. So I worked with the key engineering manager from our team here, to collaborate and to kind of bounce ideas around this. I had a couple other ideas that were not this flow. So he and I were able to collaborate, and you know, we pushed back and forth on security versus ease of use and arrived at this solution together. So they've been also happy, thankfully.
Deal with the mute. Okay, great. I mean, for Sharon, just a question, or sorry, coming from the audience. Can you tell us why there was need to have Apono on top of PagerDuty? Kind of what's the value that, you know, customers like Aaron are able to see from it?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, you have PagerDuty to do the incident response, manage the shifts and the incidents that come in, you know, with priorities, and that's key. Without that, you have no visibility. You don't know what's going on, and it's chaos. It's not clear who's the person who needs to take care of the situation. And Apono on top of that gives you that component of access management, where you actually have that really cool flexibility to say the person who can request access, exactly the right access that's needed for this incident, is shift member X. And that integration between Apono and PagerDuty is refreshing all the time. So Apono actually knows exactly every single second who is in the shift. And that means that it's not stale, it's very much alive. So shift members are always able to request the access that's needed for incident response, as you know, as people requesting access. And then the flexibility is also extended to who can approve access. So then people who are not in the shift are able to request access, and the shift member can approve their access. And that gives us that full picture of shift members gain access very easily, even sometimes automatically, because Apono has that capability to automatically grant and revoke access without requests if needed. And also, if somebody needs to be pulled in, they can make that request and be approved and pulled in by the shift member, and all of it is audited, and the admin doesn't even have to be involved. So I think that's what actually most of our customers really love about that mutual integration.
Great. So for Mandy, you know, I was clearly impressed by Aaron's, you know, solution here, but can you kind of, from your position at PagerDuty, where you see a lot of different customers using PagerDuty in many different ways, how do you see them dealing with the break glass situation? What are they doing, kind of similar to resolve this specific problem that Aaron was trying to solve?
Yeah, I think folks there's a lot of homegrown solutions, I think, out there right now for folks who have that kind of resources. I mean, that's a lot of maintenance to have to do, and a lot of thinking about those kinds of things, especially if you need to meet compliance requirements to have to do all that stuff yourself. So it feels like a lot of extra work where you could just, you know, buy a product that does all it for you. Because folks are facing a lot of the same issues. Like, no one wants to leave the access open all of the time, even though that is sort of the easiest, the lowest friction, the least amount of work for the folks who manage the access parts of the structure. But as the infrastructure gets more complex and folks need to be able to troubleshoot across lots of different pieces in their infrastructure, you don't know going into an on-call shift what you might need to request access for at any given time. So having something that is super flexible and can touch a lot of different components in a very similar way for your on-call engineers becomes super important. And you don't want to be waiting for folks to wake up in the middle of the night to give you access, or to not be able to establish the correct connections at all. So there's a lot of work being done, I will say, in this area for folks trying to figure out sort of similar things. So hopefully, as folks find this conversation, they'll learn a good solution for this. So, yeah.
Right. Are there other ways that you're finding that the PagerDuty customers are kind of looking to other solutions that they're using kind of in conjunction to, you know, just kind of throw out the idea of like what's some of the creativity that's out there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of folks that are using sort of a general catch-all key store, right? The products that are in the market for that. They're kind of overloading what those are sort of meant for. Rather than programmatic access, they're also using them for sort of catch-all access for human users, which fine if that's where you're headed, I guess. You don't get any audit out of that. You don't get any compliance reporting out of those things. There's other folks that are, you know, still using system accounts for stuff like we were talking about earlier. That's another easy way for folks to sort of onboard into this problem. I think for smaller teams, you have to get to a certain point, I think, where you actually recognize that this is a task that you need to accomplish, or a sort of problem that you want to be able to solve in your production environments. When you're small and you're only using maybe one or two providers or one or two vendors for your infrastructure, it can be very easy to use a simple solution. But as things get more complex, and especially if you have more requirements to use different vendors, then it becomes a lot harder to use sort of a simple solution that will provide what you need there. And for folks that are in compliance dedicated sort of environments, like that's not going to be their solution at all. So.
Right. So Sheldon, can you talk to me? I mean, the whole issue of auditing and compliance, you know, especially when you're dealing with very sensitive things like databases, which are holding like customer PA, you know, PII, PHI, and all the rest. How is Apono's thinking working with, you know, providing that audit trail figured into this?
Yeah, that's very, very important. And as you said, you know, some people here mentioned the compliance side of it is becoming more and more important to companies, especially as they grow and have to meet more regulations, more standards. Typically, we're looking at being able to report on who had access at any given time to critical systems. So we're talking about who had access to production, who had access to sensitive data. That's mostly what people are looking for. The traditional way of doing that with access reviews or just providing an Excel list of tickets is very ineffective. What often happens is companies find out that, oh, nobody opened a ticket, so now we have to open it in retrospect, which is an abuse of the compliance report. Or running access reviews with Excels and doing that every 3 months is highly ineffective. And I think where Apono has been able to help a lot of our customers is that we provide the full audit of every single request, when it was created, exactly the stages it went through, who approved it, was it automatically approved, at what time, when was it automatically revoked, exactly to the second, and actually with one-to-one mapping of the user and the resource that they accessed. And that's, I think, is a really important part, and Mandy talked about that as well, is when you're using shared accounts, you're sharing one set of credentials, or you're abusing some kind of a service account, you don't get that mapping. So you have no idea actually who accessed your production, who accessed your sensitive data. You're just guessing. And because Apono has that one-to-one mapping, you actually get that to a very, very granular level. It's great for compliance. And we've actually heard customers say that their auditors were really, really impressed with the improvement year to year, the first time using Apono for that purpose, but also, just for you to understand what's going on in the organization. And I've had so many people tell me somebody queried production database instead of a replica, or somebody did something and I have no idea who it was or what happened. And I had to skim through Kubernetes logs for hours. So yeah, I think that's mostly what it is.
Right. So to kind of throw over to Aaron for a second, I'm curious, there's always the issue of, whenever you implement a new way of working, you have to get buy-in. So it sounds like the whole auditing and compliance component here must have made the GRC folks happy. Probably legal too. And you have the security hat, but like, talk to me about how you kind of got this project not just approved, but like really got folks on board internally.
Yeah, the hoorah from it really was around the auditing and being able to have this easy way to grant access, right, for the smaller period of time. So Labelbox has been getting really serious about security lately, especially, of course. And part of that is these quick wins, and using Apono is a really quick win in order to have kind of that bubble around our least privilege model, right? So we're not just least privilege, but we're having like a time-bound mechanism as well, which has been really easy to sell. So it's good.
Right. And did you have to sell it to your CTO? Did the CTO say to himself, okay, we have some I don't want anything to be slowing our incident response down, because if I break if I violate an SLA, that's money.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of friction from leadership around Apono or any sort of other types of security tools. Even, I mean, the engineering managers within the organization, right? They're not having their focus number one priority be security, right? Which is normal, but they're still actually advocating for approvals in shorter amounts of times for roles to be provisioned for their developers. So they're still actually advocating for better security, even though that's not, even innately their number one priority itself.
Gotcha. All right. So I'm going to start taking some more questions in from the audience. This one goes to Aaron. So MTTR is often used as a primary metric for incident response success, but what additional metrics or factors that organizations should consider to gain more comprehensive understanding of their incident response effectiveness?
So yeah, so MTTR being primary, of course. Another, I think other metrics to look for, and this is coming from me as the security role, of course, right? So this is my perspective, I suppose. But it's, it's around like how, like who on the engineering teams are requesting these types of roles or these types of permissions, and you know, were they able to get the job done with a permission set that was actually smaller than maybe a permission set that we had been offering beforehand? It's not exactly a metric, but it's something that I'm trying to measure against, right? And understand, we used to give an admin role to our engineers, but now we kind of pivoted to give them a smaller role that still allows them to maybe do their job, right? Are they still able to do that? I think that's like a really key one for resolution.
Right. So I mean, this one kind of goes out to everybody, but I'm wondering where organizations are seeing kind of just-in-time access working into other workflows beyond simply just the one we were talking about now, and kind of the general idea of we need to have time-bound access, but like what other projects does it have an impact on?
I can start us off here. A few other projects that we've been seeing, for example, is how to automate JML, so joiner, mover, leaver. How can we make sure that people who are joining the team or unfortunately leaving the team, switching positions, how can we make sure that they have the right level of access and it goes away centrally when they don't need it anymore? So that's where just in time comes in handy, or even sometimes just attribute-based access, but it's centrally managed. And that's also something that's really, really important, not to leave any local accounts that haven't been swiped. And also, in terms of replacing access reviews, which we kind of touched on before, where you give that access sometimes quarterly. We've seen people replace that very manual process, a very tedious process, with a combination of Apono's policy engine and compliance auditing mechanism we talked about before. And also in general, when you need to access something that's not native to your role. So for example, somebody in one team needs to access resources of another team, or one project accessing an app or some component of somebody else. Maybe they need to help, or maybe they have something that's not the usual. And that's where you kind of want to have just-in-time access, because otherwise what you're doing is you're adding people locally, and you're maybe forgetting to deprovision them, and then they have access left open-ended that 99% of the time they don't need it. So it might not be the most sensitive thing in the organization, but it's over-privilege that is unnecessary. And of course, we talked about break glass. I think we kind of mentioned access to the most sensitive crown jewels. Like some people come in and their top priority is, let me safeguard my customer data or my financial information, financial data, or employee data, M&As, whatever it is. You want to put guardrails around that. And that's where having more friction is actually a good thing. Like having human approvers, making the access much more short-lived. That's actually also a big priority for organizations that we've been working with.
Can you talk to me about how people you're talking to are thinking about what goes into calculating risk?
Yeah, in general, I think it's a very common approach when you do posture management or you do kind of like risk assessment is the impact, right? So what's the data contained, or what's the possible impact of this data being exposed? Is it proprietary information? Is it something that will embarrass the company? Is it something that will put the company at regulatory risk? Like, as I said, financial information, customer data, et cetera, et cetera. So that would contribute to the risk factor, as well as the level of access can also contribute. So as I said before, it has to be a metric, because even view access to very sensitive data is highly risky. So then you need to kind of factor in the level of access versus the sensitivity of the resource. And that would usually give you a good idea as a place to start.
Okay. So question for Mandy. What are the critical components of a robust break glass strategy that are often overlooked by organizations focusing solely on MTTR?
Oh, I mean, everything that we've covered so far is super important. Like when you put your engineers on call, then the only thing that you're sort of caring about is, how quickly they're able to respond or acknowledge an incident. Like you're totally missing out on thinking about what could they need to access, how will they mobilize help from other teams if they need to, and all those kinds of things. I mean, we encourage folks to look at not just MTTR as a sort of global metric across all of their incidents, but to also think about the implications of MTTR more granularly. Like, what does it mean for your MTTR on like a Sev 1 or Sev 2 sort of incident that might have a lot of far-reaching customer impact versus what you need to know about, but maybe isn't quite as important, sort of Sev 3, Sev 4 kinds of things. And to be thinking about, we want to concentrate our activities towards the things that have the most customer impact, and they're going to have the most negative impact on the customer experience, and really focus on those kinds of things. So making sure that when you do have a break glass process in place, or you're thinking about putting one in place, that sort of your first targets are those things that have the greatest customer experience impact, are the things in production that are going to be noticed by your customers, be felt by your customers, and maybe are in your revenue path, right? The things that the services you're actually selling to users are the things that you're thinking about first, and concentrate there. It's easy to get overwhelmed if you have dozens or hundreds or thousands of services that you're thinking about. Like, you can't boil that ocean, right? You have to pick and choose the things that are going to be most important. So starting with the things that have the most impact, and then working backwards from there towards the things that are support kind of services, or things that don't run all the time, or your ETLs and some of those things that you can sort of put off until later, but focusing on those things that are most important as you're putting these processes together, just to give yourself a place to focus and prioritize, is super important for a lot of customer organizations there.
Right. So for Aaron, now that you perfected break glass response and solved everything moving forward with IR, what's the next project that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so my next project Not as much around IAM, well, some IAM is around Kubernetes hardening. So I'm going to be looking at some admission controllers, specifically around supply chain security. So like applying signatures to the containers and pods we're about to launch and kind of auditing that as it goes. So it can play into our back some, I suppose.
Right. Well, I mean, Sharon, I mean, there's definitely IAM issues, related to Kubernetes, and that's not the focus of the call. But I mean, what should folks be thinking about when it comes to Kubernetes and dealing with access to them?
Yeah, so obviously, because Kubernetes is very dynamic, things go up and down all the time. So you want to make sure your solution is dynamic and flexible, maybe using a tag mechanism. So at Apono, we kind of leverage tags a lot, environment tags, the app or product or whatever it is that this component serves. And I think where we do a very good job is that dynamic aspect of managing access to namespaces and clusters, making sure that the access is managed at a granular level, even for the more granular resources, but in a way that calibrates the dynamic nature of Kubernetes. So I think that's one thing that's very, very important. Yeah, I think that should be like the top priority. And also, if you are multi-cloud, make sure that the solution is also multi-cloud. So here we work with AKS, EKS, GKE, and obviously Kubernetes for those who are self-hosted.
Gotcha. Okay, and finally for Mandy, what else are you working on? Like, what other things should folks be thinking about from the good folks over at PagerDuty?
Yeah, so I mean, we're expanding from just basic incident response into auto remediation and helping folks, with their automation towards incident response, but also just general work that has to get done in a technical infrastructure. So through that, we had an acquisition a couple of years ago of Rundeck, and we're integrating that sort of into our products. And that also helps with, the folks that have access, need access, want access, integrate there as well, and help run specified scripts or debugging or troubleshooting or anything that you need to during that incident, anything that alleviates the sort of stress or the sort of fight or flight or freeze kind of response that folks have during incidents, to help them smooth all of that out. We're working there for sure. We've also got some other business process automation stuff coming online, and a new set of chat ops plugins that will be coming that will incorporate generative AI. So we're working all through the incident response process to help folks get more out of their incidents, so that they have fewer repeated incidents and can learn to improve their reliability through all that. So yeah.
All right, fantastic. So I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and everybody, all our participants. A recording will be available tomorrow, so please keep a lookout for that. And if anybody has any questions about how to improve your MTTR and respond better to incidents, please feel free to reach out to us over at Apono, Mandy over at PagerDuty. And great, thanks you all for joining. Take care.
Thank you.
And thank you so much to Aaron for sharing the story with us today. All right. Thanks, y'all.